accent. So Jon Shabaglian, can
That,
you
that
introduce yourself? How do you say this with a Californian accent?
I'm so impressed when an Aussie is saying an Armenian name from California, right? Well done. It's Shabaglian. You did great.
Shabaglian. Okay, all right. Thank you. Points for me trying. I probably got about 95% right with it.
Seriously.
But you can also tell I don't have the culture in my background. This happens every time I say a name. Every time.
And no doubt. Well, no doubt. Well, Shabaglian, it's kind of intimidating, right? But it's kind of phonetic, so it
but
works
but
out.
but it's
My great
important. It's important. Please keep going.
I pre well, no, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm half Armenian, half German Mennonite. My grandparents fled from the Armenian genocide, and experiencing how God is writing generational stories that you aren't even privy to, and yet whatever we call our version of life, you realize in some version you were handed a baton, and then when you realize that may have had like, in my Armenian side, I got like 1,700 years of Christianity in my bloodline. Like that's craziness, right? And then on the Mennonite side, I got like these, this psalmist side of things, and ministry layers and layers, and I not to get all super deep all fast, but I literally remember being in a chapel that was built in Armenia, built in the 800 AD,
My
800 AD.
gosh.
Okay, and I
Oh,
was like, it was literally just me, Jesus, and cold rock. And I was like, God, is this like part of the reason you called me? Like, is this the reason why you could give me songs and everything? Like, because like my great 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 grandparents' faithfulness to the cross, like this is crazy. And then it's really good actually for Americans to have a sobriety of our youthfulness. I remember going. I used to lead these music mission trips to London, and I remember going to a pub that was built in. It says established 1949 or something like that. I'm sorry, 1749. And I thought, dang, this pub is literally older than my country. And one of the downsides of being young, which America is, it's this kind of cultural experiment, is youthfulness kind of sometimes breeds arrogance. And we have this kind of like, well, we're the business and God's given this unique grace, it's a superpower, this and that. And we don't realize everything I have was inherited grace, right? Favor, provision, whatever, right? And especially, it's really healthy for Americans to realize like, whatever I have, I didn't just get because I'm like awesome, And there's an appropriate humility, And so for me, the ethnic side of things, which I didn't understand for years, and then years later got roped up into my own kingdom cultural journeys. That's pretty precious how that all merges together. You know what I mean? So, anyways.
oh no, I love that. I mean, so I can, as far as I know, I can only trace my heritage back to, oh no, I think it was definitely England, but I think part of I was a convict. I was definitely a convict that stole a pocket watch and a loaf
Wow.
of bread. And so I know it's back there somewhere, but being able to trace your heritage back that far is so special, and especially like Australia, we were colonized uh only well we were colonized later than when America was, as we know it now, is established, but we have
Yeah,
like 60 to 85,000 years of indigenous like culture as well, which is, and God's been working there the whole time. So it's
exactly.
just why, like, God's just amazing how he just sort of brings all of that together. And I love that story about you going back to essentially your roots and being like,
To-
wow.
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, and it added a real sense of sacredness because, like, even when we don't know who we are, God knows who we are. Like,
Yes.
and that's fire. I mean, the fact that you can share, like, like a stolen a pocket watch and a loaf of bread, and how God will intervene in generational cultures. But like for me, and I appreciate kind of the heart of your podcast, like kind of leaning in and have an honest conversation. I grew up in so much splatter that I really didn't even, I never really felt Armenian enough or German Mennonite enough. I didn't even really know who I was. And so I actually, there's nothing like shaking to make things, um, you just are just, it's more survival, right? And to realize in the fullness of time, like even when I didn't know who I was, God knew what he was doing. So I spent a lot of time in the African American culture. I'm kind of like the soul chocolate guy, with the, when I toured, my bass player and drummer were always black, and and I was kind of always the Armenian in the middle, connecting the cultures and stuff. But then it was it was almost like the Lord is like, I let you, stand with, be with, and bridge for a culture that's not yours, who had known persecution, and now I'm going to show you who you are. And if I had 100 lifetimes, I couldn't have put myself in the story, but literally. Again, I'm half Armenian, half German Mennonite, and on the 100th year of the Armenian genocide, I got invited by Mennonite missionaries to be the worship leader on the anniversary of the 100th year of the Armenian genocide in Istanbul, Turkey, to reconcile Turks and Armenians.
Whoa. I mean, I know I should know that from your CV, but also that's just mind-boggling. God is
It's
amazing.
it's mind-boggling and terrifying and extraordinary. And so when we talk later about Symphony of Peace and these songs, the Lord has been writing healing stories in the middle of the vilest part of mankind, and I have been able to have a front row seat to the small little piece of that story, and it's absolutely insane. And so when you're talking about being a creator or creating, some people just want to get stuff off their chest. But I would rather now say, Lord, what do you want to say? What kind of stories do you want to pen? And could you trust me with sharing even the smallest part of some of that? So instead of just being heard or being, followed, we could have your heart imparted down on a crack, broken little rock called earth that needs your heart real bad. And quite frankly, when you going from being a musician to like what I could say now is psalmist, a musician for God, honestly, I don't want to paint any other way. It's so I've seen too much in an amazing way.
Yeah.
If you can imagine being on the soil with who's supposed to be your enemies on the 100th year of the genocide, and your grandparents fled for their lives, and your great grandfather was taken up on a death march and shot just because he was Armenian. And yet 100 years later, I'm either going to teach my son to bless or curse. And I'm either going to walk. I had to decide when they asked me to be a part of this historic reconciliation gathering. I mean, they made a documentary and all kinds of stuff. I had to decide first, am I Armenian first or am I Christian first?
Wow.
Scary, man.
Wow. Oh, that is, I can't imagine holding that. I mean, I know that God enabled you to, but that's a lot. Can you go back? Tell me as much as you want. Tell me your
Of
story. How
course.
did you get to this point where you so I was looking at your website and you talk about music on mission, which
Mm-hmm.
just made me excited. And clearly
Thanks.
hearing some of your story, that makes perfect sense. But
Mm-hmm.
tell me, how did Jon Shabaglian, how did he get here today in 2023? How did this person form and create this music?
Well, it's sweet of you to ask personally, but it is also I love the insightfulness of it, because now, about 5 years ago, I started a work called Psalmist Mission, where we're now discipling and training other musicians to be trustworthy psalmists and on mission. So my goal now is to try to get to like 75 or 80 and die with a smile on my face, because we raised up an army of other gifted artisans who are worship leaders, songwriters, but they'll bring their guitar under a bridge and play for homeless people, and carry the good gospel that brings peace even in the middle of atrocities. Stand between darkness on behalf of light and say no, and protect the vulnerable and bring the good news. And instead of saying just saying Jesus is Lord, they can say Jesus is Lord, and all of a sudden the human soul can wake up.
Yeah. Oh,
So it is crazy. I looking back now, it's kind of feels like the journey God's taken me on. It's been pretty terrifying, and it's been remarkable, kind of like both of those. And yet I feel like the journey of the last 20 years or so with the scriptures is now becoming curriculum that I didn't realize. You know what I mean? to now pass on to raise up more roars. And so the real question you asked, which is awesome, which is how how does someone get to become a tool or even an arrow, if you will, that God could pull back for a while and then release for a divine purpose and actually hit a mark, right?
Yeah.
Instead of how do you get really popular and get the most attention and then screw it all up and grieve God? Like, don't we have enough of those stories? Do you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Like, and here's the deal. I'm a big fat sinner, right? So it's not like, I love what you were saying earlier. Like, we can't be the people that, that we are disappointed with also, right? At the end of the day, all we can say is like, follow me as I follow Christ and try to bring shalom, that word peace, to a hurting world on behalf of God, and with God, right? And so yeah, I mean, now I'm very focused on what are the ingredients that make and form. I used to say form a psalmist, but now I'm actually saying what are the ingredients that to forge a psalmist
Oh, that's good.
who who is both trustworthy and on mission. Um, how do you how do you cultivate an artist who doesn't just want to build their empire that literally God has to knock over in a little bit because it doesn't acknowledge his son? You know, we're either more than we think we are, or we're little priceless ants on an anthill that's on God's rock. You know what I mean? Like
Yes. Yes.
and we think we're so amazing, but the reality is we're lost without him. We're lost without him. And so, anyways, the answer is how did I get here? And I am trying to be someone who can say, hey guys, follow me, and I'm trying to go in the direction of God, and I'm trying to leverage my life to help a hurting world for His namesake. But how do you get to that place? Honestly, it takes a ton of shaking. It takes a ton of brokenness. Um, I took a bunch of our psalmist graduates to do this community outreach a little bit ago, and I had this prayer leader come up to me and he's like, John, do you know where diamonds come from? And it was like this old Yoda talking to me. It was so awesome. And I'm I don't know. He's like, volcanoes. Wow. He's like, you know what doesn't burn, John? Gold and silver. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's pretty deep. The most beautiful gem that we can find on this planet comes out of something that absolutely would destroy life.
Yeah.
A volcano. It destroys life. And yet, if you can find that product, you hold it up in the light and it literally explodes light in every direction. And the whole world stops and stares and says, how do I get one of that? Right? And so God is literally in the process all over the earth, in Australia, California, Uzbekistan, and who knows wherever else, forging his diamonds. But oftentimes it comes with great cost. So I didn't have a lot of psalmists. I didn't have any psalmist fathers growing up, and I had, I'm thankful for my mom and dad. I love them greatly, but I didn't. I had a lot of also brokenness that I grew up into, and so growing up, I was just like, if you're real, God, you better just come get me out of this craziness because this is super confusing. And you can go to school crying enough times, and I just started kind of calling out to God to see if He was real. But I studied just about every religion there was because I was like, if there is somebody on the other side of the looking glass and He actually has real power and can help me in this situation, then I want to know that guy. But if this is all fake and a Peter Pan Neverland story, I ain't wasting my whole life on a Neverland story, And it was actually out of desperation, I started taking a chapter a day before I went to bed in the Bible. And I'm an artist. I don't like to read, but you get to the point where, the turmoil in life was eclipsed by the need for help.
Wow.
And so guess what? Jon Shabaglian started a chapter a day before I went to bed, hoping that if God was real and He was in the scriptures, I might find some help. Just straight up God honest truth, Jessica, is that I met somebody way bigger than I planned. And that's not religious. That's not even church services or youth groups. That is straight up a vulnerable, fragile kid met his maker. It was like Pinocchio finally giving up and running to the arms of Geppetto. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And you can't really understand your purpose and destiny until you go back home to Geppetto, man. And that has started a journey. And it was at the same time that I started sat down. I started writing music. I didn't know piano at all. As the story goes, when I was a kid, my I guess I'll share this really quickly. It's precious. I have a twin brother, and
Oh,
my parents couldn't have kids, and so my mom prayed for a number of years, and she prayed the prayer of Hannah in the Bible for God to give her a child to loan to God, and then she got pregnant and gave birth to my brother, and then the doctor said, "Get ready for exhibition B," and she's like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "Push again," and I'm like, "Here I come," and so you know that's actually how it kind of went down. And so anyways, just to see God's hand, kind of guiding us through all of it. And so he has been really kind, even through the forging in the volcano, so to speak. And he showed me himself, and he's let me I've been like I said, two bloodlines, Armenian and German
mhm.
Mennonite. So as the story goes, my mom said I was born in an Armenian apostolic church. She used to hold me, and one at the in Armenian churches, you would sing the Lord's Prayer. It's called the High Mer, every week. And I guess as the story goes, my mom was holding me at 8 months old, and I was singing along the melody. So I don't know, I don't fully remember that, but anyways, there seemed to be some musicality there. And then in high school, through a lot of the shaking, I God started healing me. It was like music therapy before that was cool, right?
Wow.
Music therapy, like I would lock myself in a piano. I didn't know anything, but I had an ear, so I started writing. And God used music to both heal me, but also kind of open up sensitivity to him at the same time. And so I
Mhm.
started writing, and he was guiding me. And then eventually studied formally and was touring and making records and doing worship ministry. But the goal is not the stuff. The goal is, are you in alignment with your maker,
Yeah.
Pinocchio? You know what I mean? Because if you are, you're gonna understand why you're alive. So um,
Yes.
it's been quite a journey through
Yeah.
that. But if that gives you a little lens, that's
Yeah.
kind of how we got to here.
Absolutely. So, fun fact, I'm also a twin. So,
Oh,
I've also had a lifetime of people saying, "Can you read each other's minds?" To which I
yes,
say,
of course. Here it
"No,
comes. Yeah,
no,"
yeah, yeah.
every time. So I hear that, I'm like, "Oh, you get it." I
Absolutely.
I would love to know, um, through all of this and you meeting God, but also it sounds like there were elements of your upbringing where you were, at least you were exposed to religion and church and things
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
Um, where did your cultural heritage, your Armenian and Mennonite heritage, when did you become more aware of that and actually go, oh, this is part of my history and who I am, in addition to the fact that I'm Californian? When
Yeah.
did this uh, realization really come into play for you, and how did that form you?
That's an awesome question. That's an awesome question too. So, um, God has perfect timing, but sadly, I didn't know who I was for a super long time. Like I said, because of the trauma, and my wife and I, we started an anti-human trafficking organization for about 11 years, and that she's led, and we've worked with some of the vulnerable and such. And when those who've experienced trauma, um, trauma takes priority, and then it becomes survival, right? So not that in any way my experience was at those levels, but it was intense for me, and so that just took precedent. So the beauty of my culture, whether from food dishes to where where's grandpa from, to all those conversations, I didn't know. And but like I said, the amazing thing was, even when you don't know who you are, God knows who you are. And I don't say that flippantly. I say that like literally, he held out on me for years, and it wasn't till around that 2015 window, when I got invited into that reconciliation work in Turkey, that and it was after I'd spent a long time with the African American community. So, like I mentioned, it was like he was having me uh, be adopted into a culture that I love. My sister-in-law is African American. My pastors have been black. My mentors have been black. That was just my band was half black. Like I just always was kind of like, I I had all black brothers on the rhythm section, the white killers on the guitar, and I was the Armenian in the middle. Like that had always kind of been my vibe, and the soul pop thing and with soul rock and whatever. But I look back now and I see, like I said, God was letting me be a part of and advocate for a culture that wasn't even mine. And then in the fullness of time, he invited me into the story of my own. And that, if you can imagine not feeling like you're, what you actually are, half German Mennonite and half Armenian enough. And then literally in the fullness of time, I had Mennonite missionaries invite me to work with, to reconcile with Turks and Armenians as the worship leader in Istanbul, Turkey on the 100th year of the Armenian genocide. Like, are you gotta be kidding me?
It's wild.
And then the crazy thing is I found out a year into this journey after my first trip, because I had like three years in a row. I found out that my Armenian grandma was rescued in an orphanage by Mennonite missionaries.
No.
You can't even write this stuff, dude, except God. He can write those stories, and 3 generations later have a little psalmist kid sing about it. Like, you can't even write that stuff. So when you don't, here's the message to our listeners: when you don't even know who you are, God knows who you are. And Jon Shabaglian has personally experienced that.
Oh, it's so good. I'm getting teary, and I know that we're 20 minutes in. This is wonderful. I want to ask you about your single Symphony of Peace, which you
Yes.
co-wrote with our friend Temetope.
Temetope. I heard that you knew my bro. I'm like,
I know, he's the best, and
he's
forever
amazing,
forgive me
right?
for saying his name wrong. He's the best. I love him.
No.
Can you tell me about Symphony of Peace? How did that song come together? How did you guys meet?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, this is such a precious story, but it's cool to give you some of the backdrop of the reconciliation stuff, because Mennonites are always this peacemaking folks, and they literally rescued my grandma fleeing from the Armenian genocide, and then God gives me this reconciliation song with a Turk in 2015, who's a world-class violist we released and debut in Istanbul, and then years later we're writing more songs like Shalom, and I did with Aaron Schust, and now it's Symphony of Peace. Like, Lord, what are you doing? Like, what's happening inside of me? Why do I keep writing all these songs like this? And I've always loved to tuck scripture in the heart of music, because like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. You know what I mean? But I like to be a part of writing a song with an amazing artist like Temetope, who is also Nigerian. Like I said, again, kicking it with the blacks has always been my natural vibe anyways. But then the psalmist that we've mentored in Psalmist Mission, 4 years of discipling, and then we're in our 5th cohort. I took the cream from all 4 years of training psalmists, and we made them the choir. So they're literally they're like, our choir is like our psalmist disciples that we've mentored, and not to mention, literally in the middle of such a shaking season in our life, I step into this songwrite with Temetope and my dear friend Sam Hart, was an amazing producer, and in 3 hours we stepped back, like after this session, and like, what just happened? And the Lord put my own daughter's name in a song. My daughter's name is Symphony, and the Lord was writing a symphony of peace.
Oh, man, I love that. That's so good.
Isn't that fire? I mean, you'd think I made up that story, but it's all true.
I love how like in your story, which, and your generational story, which has so much, like, it reads like a movie script in the sense that it has so much to it. There is so much in each individual person, each individual story and culture in it. But God is now, like, he's creating something so exquisite and beautiful literally through you now, because you're creating music and hymns and psalms out of it, and you're like, your daughter's name is literally the name of a song. It's like God is creating something stunning out of well, a volcano essentially. It's like he's created a diamond.
Totally.
That's so amazing. Yeah.
So now I feel floored and humbled. The crazy thing is, this single we just dropped came right after a record that we stewarded for 2 years. It was literally the Spirit of God fell on me on this plane flight, and I got this message, and it was a theme we carried for the whole for 2 years, and it was called Bow Everything. So the crazy thing is, like, and I did not ask for that cute little message, because Bow Everything is not cute, okay? Like, it's not cute. And actually, when Symphony of Peace came, it was in a season of incredible shaking that came right after 2 years of carrying a message called Bow Everything that we released in the middle of COVID. And it was like, Lord, what on earth are you doing right now? Because, like, I feel like I'm both sharing your messages and on the operating table at the same time. Like, what is happening? And it's as if he's like, while the bombs and volcano explosions are going off, he's writing a symphony. He's so in control. He's so, the song I did with my dear bro Aaron Shoes, that he's so in command that he's literally sitting with his chair right next to the volcano with his gorgeous viola or violin, and he's playing a symphony because he's that able to write healing and restoration even in the middle of what would look like disaster. And that, my friend, is a message I believe he wants to say to his people now, which is, we are so, by human nature, we just push away pain and push away shaking. We're like, I wanted to go back to the way it was, or life to be better. And the Father's like, I want you close to me. And there's too much inside of you that repels me right now. And I can't, it's in the way, all these barriers. And we sing about grace, which is profound. But there are areas in our life that are actually keeping us away from him, as if we're rocking God repellent every day next to our cologne or perfume, And we can sing about grace, but we're missing the communion because there's things in our life that aren't learning to trust him. And it's almost like after a year of him shaking the whole earth, he's like, you guys listening now? Yeah, I meant what I said. Bow everything, and you can be on my team. And then in his magnificence, he's never going to take more than he gives. He's a kind God. He doesn't take, but he will unapologetically say, get rid of all the trash in your hand because I'm trying to put something beautiful. And it's scary when the trash is all we have known. It's our familiar, It's the only thing we have known. And so it's scary. Bow everything. But all I can say is, on that plane flight, I didn't ask for that message, but Spirit of God fell on me, and I was bawling, and he took me to 2 Samuel 24:24, where King David said, I will not offer to God something that costs me nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, if we bow everything, the symphonies that God may write will not only be breathtaking for us, but maybe your life might be a part of being like divine Neosporin to squirt across a hurting world. And that would be the honor of a lifetime.
For people listening to this who are saying, I want that, but I don't know how to get to that point with God. I can't even figure out if what I'm holding is trash or treasure. What would you say to them? How do they take that step towards God and give everything over?
Such a beautiful, sacred question. It's so precious. I almost want to just pause and not rush into the answer, because it's so important. So important. Our souls need, just like Pinocchio couldn't find his purpose until he finally gave up and went back home to Geppetto. He couldn't find out who he really was, a real boy who couldn't be that until he came home. The amazing thing about God is he will let us run away. He will let us fill our hands with garbage on top of garbage and say, well, no, I need it, or it's current, or it's 2023, whatever. Like, there's no way, I have to do life the way everybody is. And God is saying, I came that you might have life, and life to the full. So you can listen to all the noise, but I don't need to be followed on Twitter. God owns the universe. He doesn't need for people to follow him, because he literally is life itself, right? And so your question was, what do you do when you feel like I don't know if it's trash or treasure, and yet you want to live with purpose? The beautiful thing is, And not only am I one life, but there are countless saints across this globe who are experiencing this. But they're probably not the superstar demigods that you're watching, because God doesn't want any other name to be louder than the one name that saves, and that's his son. There's only one name. It's not Jon Shabaglian that'll get your name written in the book of life. And ironically, we build empires based around individuals who can't get us to the most important place in the world, which is in right standing with God, much less heaven. But heaven is just going to be extension with the fact that I was in right standing with God. But I want to encourage you, wherever you're at right now, literally it is as simple as, God, I cannot do this on my own. I yield, you win, and I choose to follow you. If you're willing to take me, which the awesome thing is he only accepts sinners. You know what I mean? Like, that's the awesome thing. Like, and if you're perfect, you can't talk to God, right? You know what I mean? I mean it best, you know what I mean? But he only talks to sinners, you know what I mean? But that broken heart that says, God, I bow everything. I am sorry for trying to keep the trash in my hand. I acknowledge that you probably have a better idea on my plan. And quite frankly, I don't want to miss what the story that you wrote over my life. If my life can be an example in that, I do not want to miss what God's written about my life. And he has countless stories that he's written. And everybody listening has a personalized story written by the Father. He's that meticulous. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that in the journey of becoming a fragile and an imperfect psalmist, I can tell you about a time when I was collabing with this hip hop artist friend of mine, and we wrote a song called Jesus Loves You Like That. And we were prepping a music video to shoot for Jesus Loves You Like That. And in the middle of the time, I had an encounter with God I'll never forget, and I realized that Jesus loved me like that. Wow. And in the middle, it sounds so lame to say, but I literally did it. I knew that he loved everybody, but I didn't know if Jon Shabaglian was in on that story. I knew that God loved the whole world, but and I could sing it with conviction to tell Jessica and all her crew that they are important. But because of so much shaking, so much rejection and brokenness, I literally didn't even know where I stood. And he did some incredibly personal things to me that day, where I will now know. It's in my Kingdom Journal that I keep, and and it's one significant marker. I always know that Jesus loves me like that, and I am a personalized story and he is wanting to walk with me. And so that is what remarkable, because he sent his son and he crushed his son on the cross so that a holy God could put his Holy Spirit inside of a nasty carrier, which is us, right? Dirt and clean don't work except with God. He found a way, he literally he is so committed to us getting this answer right. He literally crushed his own son so that he could justify putting his Holy Spirit inside of an unclean temple. I got a son. He's my favorite son in the world. I only have one, but his name is Christopher. There's no way I'd give my son for someone else. Surely not people who are flipping me off. But that's the magnitude of God. And so it literally is as simple as, dear God, I need you. Show me the story you've written. And forgive me of what I've done and help me to follow. And then literally the destiny awaits.
So good. I normally finish my interviews with a few fun, quick questions. It feels really disingenuous to jump after you've shared something that profound. Before I go there, is there anything else that you wanted to share about Symphony of Peace or anything that I have just not asked you about?
Oh, you're so sweet. I probably would love to just, working with Timothy, and it has been such a privilege, and because he has such a heart for reconciliation, and I do too. We did an interview on CCM Magazine recently in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and it was just so precious. It just felt like God was with us while the cameras were on, and it was like talking to my brown brother on the other side. We were finishing each other's sentences. And the story, that kind of the divine strategies that God is unveiling in these shaking times are, quite frankly, they're remarkable. they're remarkable. And honestly, I want to spend the rest of my life finding out what other treasures he's got laid down in the volcanoes. You know what I mean? But I do want to say a little bit about this being on mission and the privilege, in addition to being a worship pastor and recording artist for so many years. This last 5 years, I've got to start a work called Psalmist Mission. So it's on my website, jonshabaglian.com, or you can go to psalmistmission.org, like Psalms, like in the Bible, psalmistmission.org. And we have been leading this worship cohort, Psalmist Mission worship cohort in California. And over the last 5 years, we're on our fifth cohort, and like the Psalmist family has grown to like almost 90 across California
Wow.
and now beyond. And they're like every color God makes, like Korean, Hispanic, Hmong, Ukrainian, African American, Armenian. It's like a giant bag of Skittles. It feels like we're getting ready for heaven. You know what I mean? And it's my favorite flavor, Skittles. You know what I mean? All of them. And so I now I've had the privilege to lead that, and to not only is making music, but now pointing to the movement of discipling and training other musicians and artists for God. And so if you're interested in that as well too, psalmistmission.org or info@psalmistmission. I have seen how God has used the prayer movement and the worship movement to literally merge. It's like peanut butter and jelly together with like this explosive mission. And literally, I'm working with our mayor, deputy mayor, and we're watching homicides plummet. We're watching watching statistics plummet and economic GDP launching through the sky. Fresno is now 13th in the nation, and I am seeing how cities can literally heal, and how Psalmist Mission has even been not all but part of that story to bridge. And now the community used to call me to lead this event or that event. Now they're calling, hey, can Psalmist Mission come out and lead the National Day of Prayer or this outreach or that outreach? And so I'm seeing a model being created that I believe can heal many other regions. I didn't come with it's not like it was over novel. I didn't come up with the word psalmist. Little David used to play his harp for King Saul, and demons would leave Saul. So God's been cooking this artistry thing for a lot of years, but I am not playing around. And I am blessed to be able to lead a work that is also, I see now, a model that can replicate in many other regions. And it would be so exciting to me if what we've seen in California, not for the sake of Psalmist Mission getting bigger, but for the kingdom of darkness getting smaller, if that model could be inspiration. You know, music goes in places other things just can't, you know. Yeah. And I say we have had too many stories of worship leaders and recording artists that are internal train wrecks. I think we have too many of those stories. And what I say is the artisan, they matter because of their intrinsic value, not just because of what they bring to the table. And if we disciple and care about them on the individually, they will bloom like a beautiful flower. You don't have to rip it out of the ground and say it's my flower and kill it. You can water it and cultivate it, and then they will do just what God intends them to do. And they will lead the procession in front of the saints, just like they have for millennia, to remind the people of God, whether it's through COVID or whatever else, He is faithful. And it even will be a missional tool to bring light into darkness. So if that could be inspiring, we'd love to hear from you on that too. And that has been something amazing to see what God's done with Psalmist Mission.
That makes me so excited. That makes me so excited. I'll make sure that we put all the show notes and everything, like all the details in the show notes, so that people obviously listen to your single, go buy it, stream it, but also connect with Psalmist Mission and everything that you guys are doing. So
Thanks
yeah,
so
all
much.
of that, so that we point people in the right direction. They go, of course, I want to connect.
So
I
cool.
have, I've just got one question for you that I want to finish with. If
Please.
you could go back to when you were 15, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I think I know pretty quick. I one of the beauties, one of the beautiful things, one of the diamond parts that came out of the volcano is that I was not having like a psalmist father, right? I didn't have that. Like, where's the 50-year-old amazing artisan who is an incredible songwriter and artist, but he still has the same wife and he doesn't do shady stuff in the dark. Like, where's that guy? And I didn't have any of that. So so out of the void of not having like a psalmist father, I just remember my late teens, 20s, 30s, and now early 40s, where I had this burden to pour into others. It was like God would show me some stuff, and then he just like, man, what I share with you, kick it down to them, you know? So I've been this kind of like weird, you know, thinking about raising up others and leaving a legacy when I'm like in my 20s, you know, like who's thinking about that, you know? But so that's kind of the beautiful side. The downside is that I didn't live in the peace that I should have. I've been trying to help God fulfill the calling on my life for a bunch of years. And quite frankly, it's exhausting. So I would tell that 15-year-old kid, you got a call, kid. And God wrote a story, and it's going to be amazing. But you don't need to help him make it happen. You just need to stay close to him.